Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar. Today's webinar is a joint effort between Octopus Deploy and Testery.io. Today, we are going to be talking about empowering your development team with post-deployment verification testing. And I have the founder and CEO of Testery.io on with me today. Hey, Chris, how are you today?
Good. How are you, Derek?
I'm good. I'm good. It's a bit wet, or in Scotland we use the term dreich. It's a bit grey, but no, everything's good here. I'm really looking forward to today's webinar. Tell us a little bit about yourself, Chris.
Yeah, so I'm the founder of Testery, a cloud-based continuous testing platform located in Midwest United States.
Very nice. Very nice. Well, thank you very much for joining me today. I'm really looking forward to it. Okay, so let's start with a little bit of housekeeping. In the next 24 to 48 hours, you'll get an email with a link of the recording along with the slide deck and other resources that we're going to be using in today's webinar. Question-wise, for those of us on Zoom, what I'd like you to do is post your questions in the Q&A window within Zoom. And what we're going to do is we're going to be at a bit at the end of today's session where we are going to take questions. You can also post them in our community Slack, so you can join octopus.com/Slack, join the webinar channel, and then post your questions in there. Okay, so let's jump in. So what is Octopus Deploy? Octopus Deploy, for those that you don't know, is an automated deployment tool. You can use it to deploy things such as infrastructure, your .NET packages, databases, Java, and everything in between. You can deploy that to endpoints. You can use it to promote releases between environments. So for instance, you make that deployment, you can push it to dev, then test, then pre-prod, then production, and all those other environments in between. The key thing about Octopus is that it's repeatable, reliable, and consistent. And the way we get that consistency is you have the same deployment process for development as you do for test, as you do for pre-production, and then lastly production. So you've already ran through the same deployment process. It's an API first platform, meaning anything you can do within the user interface, you can also do it over the API. Octopus comes in two different flavors. We have our cloud product, which has been around for about 2.5 years now. That's hosted on Azure Kubernetes service, and you can host your Octopus Cloud instance around the world in the US, Europe, and even in Australia. We also have our on-premises, which has been around since 2011, 2012. And a fun fact that you've probably heard me say before if you've joined one of our previous webinars, is that almost 1 in 10 deployments in Azure are via Octopus, with concerningly amount 50% of them actually coming from Visual Studio directly. I think it was Damien Brady who once said, friends don't let other friends right-click deploy. I'm sorry if you've heard me say that joke. I won't lie. I've probably used it hundreds of times. One of the good things as well is there's a free starter edition as well. So if you have 10 or under, it's entirely free. So if you work in a small team and that's all you use it for, it's entirely free. And that can be hosted on premise or even on a laptop or in the cloud as well. Okay, so I'm going to pass you over to Chris now and you can hear all about Testery.
Thanks, Derek. So as I mentioned in the intro, Testery is a cloud-based continuous testing platform. So what that means is you can integrate Testery with your deployment pipeline in order to run the right set of tests at the right time. We support the ability to run different versions and subsets of the tests. So if you want to run one set of tests against your development environment, a different set of tests against your QA environment, we ensure that you're running the correct version of the tests so that you don't have test failures due to running the wrong version of the tests against a different environment. We also support most open source test automation frameworks. So we support WebDriver.io, Selenium-based frameworks, Cypress, SpecFlow, NUnit, you name it. If you don't see one that you want, we're constantly adding new ones, so feel free to reach out to us and let us know which one you'd like to see next. We also integrate with source control, build servers, Octopus Deploy, which we'll see today in Slack, so that we're running the correct version of the tests at the right time, in the right environments, and we're getting the test results to the places that you'd like to see them, whether that's Slack so that your team knows that they have a build they need to look at, or whether it's reporting back to Octopus Deploy so that you know the deployment process shouldn't continue until the tests are passing, or however your process is set up. And then finally, we also have a free plan, which enables you to start running smoke tests today if you'd like to go ahead and get started. So today we're going to primarily be talking about post-deployment testing. So what is post-deployment testing? Well, unlike unit and integration tests, which generally run as part of the build process or on a local machine, post-deployment testing takes place after the system under test has been deployed to an environment. So this fits in really well with Octopus Deploy because Octopus Deploy is putting your code out into real environments, whether they're dev, test, or production environments. And you may need to run some tests after that deployment takes place. The types of testing here can include things like automated acceptance tests, any system testing that you might be doing, or smoke testing that you might do in order to make sure that the system is working correctly after deployment. So why might you want to do post-deployment testing instead of just relying solely on unit and integration testing? Well, one reason is to ensure mission critical functionality. So for most organizations, there's some portion of functionality which is considered mission critical, maybe 5 to 20 different user flows where they're just so important to the business that it's really embarrassing for an engineering team if you put something out there and that's not working properly. Things like purchase paths, for example. You may also want to test the deployment process itself. So just making sure that the code works isn't enough to say that you're going to have a production system that works. You need to make sure that whatever process you're using to deploy to your QA environment is working properly. So you want to test your QA environment after the deploy and make sure that you're using the same deployment process to go to a production environment, and then do some smoke testing again to make sure that things went out correctly. It's also a good opportunity to detect external environment and dependency changes. So as much as we try to control everything in our deployment environments and with the third-party dependencies that we're bringing in, things change. It can be at the load balancer or various other places that you may not have direct control over depending on how your environment's set up. Maybe it's your CDN or however you're doing caching. So it's great to be able to check those things in the real world. You also may want to check for data issues. So we don't all have the luxury of being able to have production-like data in our dev and test environments. And so sometimes certain issues don't present themselves until they get into an environment that has realistic data. And, why might that not be an option for you? Well, take big data shops, for example. It could be cost prohibitive for them to have dev and test copies of their big data databases. That can get really expensive. So this is post-deployment testing can be a good opportunity to check those as well. And then also being able to confirm your proper environment changes. So if you're integrating with a third-party system and you've got a dev API token, did you forget to add the QA token or the prod token when you do a deployment? So some examples of types of post-deployment tests you may want to consider implementing. In terms of mission critical flows, it really depends on your business, but you may have things like lead generation. If you're an e-commerce site, excuse me, if you're an e-commerce site, your purchase paths could be important. Account creation, so are users able to create new accounts? Are they able to sign up? Authentication, can they log in after they've created accounts? And then if you're a B2B company, you may have certain reports that your customers can run in your platform that you really just always need to make sure work because that's why they're coming to your platform. In terms of what I call integration points, those are integrations with maybe third parties or other systems, like sending email notifications, where they're very likely configured to behave differently in your dev and prod environments based on configuration. So when sending an email, for example, you probably don't want your dev environment to send emails to real customers, but when you go to production, you do. And so you want to make sure that that functionality is working properly after your deployment. And then the last category is evidence of a successful deployment. So, I've had it happen before where, we deployed something and everything looked like it was good, but we couldn't figure out why the bug we just fixed wasn't fixed and we could still reproduce it in our environment. Several days later, realized that I had accidentally put out a bad deployment, and because our system was resilient with blue-green deployments, it rolled back to a previous version, and I had a mistake in the build script that didn't tell me about that situation. And so being able to test to say, hey, version 23 was supposed to go out. Is version 23 the one that's currently running? It is really helpful, as well as checking any kind of health checks that you may have or response codes, which can be either your web response codes or API response codes. So if you've decided you want to set up post-deployment tests, now the question becomes, how do I do that with Octopus Deploy and Testery? So the way that this works is you have your tests and you have your code living in source control the way that it normally does. You have your build server, which assembles your test artifacts as well as your production artifacts. And then your build server, with all the nice integrations they have with Octopus Deploy, will push those artifacts to Octopus Deploy, where you can then create a release, which is a consistent set of artifacts that get deployed to your various environments. And depending on which environments you have and how your lifecycle is set up, that could be multi-tenanted, it could be single tenant, and it can go through various environments like dev, test, and prod, depending on your lifecycle. What's cool with the Testery integration is because we're version aware and we're environment aware, we can actually trigger the right test run based on what version of the test is supposed to be deployed to the environment. So that's what we're going to go ahead and show you now. So the first thing I'd like to bring up here is the Octopus Deploy setup we're using for testing here. Sorry, one moment. So we have a sample project set up in Octopus for this. And what it's simulating is more or less what would happen with a web deployment. It's just in this case, it's just a hello world type web deployment, but you could, of course, substitute this with copying out to S3 or doing an Azure web deploy. Really depends on how your environment is set up. And we have this project set up to go through a life cycle where it's going to deploy to the development environment, and then the QA environment, and then the production environment. And you can see in the process, we currently just have a web deploy step. So what we want to do today is we want to go ahead and add our post-deployment tests to this deployment process. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and go to testery.io. And we're going to go to the plans page and just select a free plan for today. And you can sign up with your GitHub or your Bitbucket account. Either one of those works fine. So today we're going to use a GitHub account. Okay, we'll select the Testery account. Now for the organization name, this would be your company name or whatever organization you represent. So we're just going to call this the Octopus webinar. For selecting your repository, in GitHub, we have a example WebDriver IO project set up. So I'm going to go ahead and select that one. And then in terms of the testing framework, I'm going to pick WebDriver IO. And then I'm just going to go ahead and select the free plan. And now we're all set up to run end-to-end tests. So what tests are we going to be running today? Well, I mentioned that we set up an example WebDriver IO project. So here we have Cucumber style WebDriver IO tests. They're just doing basic things like navigating to Yahoo, navigating to Google, checking page titles. This happens to be written in a JavaScript framework. But you could just as easily write these in various open source testing frameworks, including SpecFlow and .NET. So it really depends on your dev teams and automation teams, what flavor of testing makes the most sense for you. And so we're going to wire up this project to run anytime we promote a release in Octopus Deploy to one of the environments. So in order to do that, first we need to go to the integrations tab and grab our API token. And this is just a test account, so you won't be able to do too much damage with that. And so we're going to go ahead and add the step to our process. And then here we want to search for Testery. And since I've already installed the Testery templates, you see create, test, run, and report deployment here. If you're doing this for the first time, you'll see them under community contributed step templates. So these step templates are deployed to the Octopus Deploy library and are available for you to add. And we're going to start by adding create test run. So say we want to set this up to run our smoke tests. Whenever there's a deployment, we say run smoke tests. We select, for this, we're going to select run once on a worker. If you have a tenanted deployment, you may want to run a test run for every deployment, or sorry, for every tenant, or you may want to just run one for all of your tenants. It really kind of depends on your tests and what kind of deployments you're doing. You can do either here, but today we're just going to run once on the worker to create one test run. And then in order to configure this, we just need to paste in our token. We need to specify our project name. So here we have WebDriver IO. Now, in terms of the Testery environment, this is telling Testery which environment you want to run the test for. So we need to configure those real quick in the Testery side. So we're going to come over here and we're going to go to our environments tab. And we're going to add environments that correspond to what we had on the Octopus Deploy side. So we're going to go ahead and add a development environment. We're going to add a QA environment. We're going to add a production environment. And this is a really nice feature because it enables you to add variables that are specific to those environments. And those variables will get substituted into your tests prior to running. So this is very often used if you have different URLs or test accounts and credentials that you want to get passed into the tests when you run them in one environment versus the other. And if you're adding a secure variable, you can go ahead and check this box for encrypted so that no one can copy the password, even if it is just a test account. So that's how you set up the environments. So now to wire up the create test run step for our integration here, we just need to say that we want to use the Octopus environment name. So that'll make it consistent when we deploy to development in Octopus. It'll run the development tests in Testery. In terms of tags, if you're using tags in your tests, some folks like to tag their tests with these are smoke tests, or this is our full regression. This is feature A or feature B. You can pass those tags in here, and then when the test run kicks off, it will only run those specific tests. In terms of the build ID, we're going to go ahead and map that to our Octopus release number so that we can see which release the test run was for. And then now for the Git reference, what you would typically do here is if you're deploying your website and you're deploying your build information to Octopus, you have available what is the commit hash of my artifacts. So normally you would wire that up here. In this sample project, we don't have that set up. So I'm just going to hard code that to a specific version of the tests. But what's nice about this is it means if, say you're creating a QA release off of a QA branch, and then the developers have moved on and added new functionality to the dev branch, you're going to get the right version of the tests for the branch that's being tested in the environment that's being tested, which is really nice. It helps avoid some of those issues of, the reason that these 10 tests are failing is because the functionality has changed and the tests need to be updated. So keeping those two things in sync is really critical. And that's really all we need to do to add this integration. So I'm going to go ahead and save it. And then now I'm going to create a release with our new process, save the release, and then kick off the deploy to development. So now that we have a deployment running, this first step is just doing, a hello world type deploy. Like I said, in your environment, it could be doing any number of things, and you could have any number of steps here. And then when we get to the run smoke test step, what it's going to do is it's actually going to take a copy of the tests, send them to Testery, and kick off the test run. And then Testery is going to automatically spin up test runners dynamically in order to run the tests in parallel. And we can actually do that at extremely high levels of concurrency. We have one customer that's running over 750,000 test executions per month. So we can definitely put a lot of throughput through the system, which is one of the benefits of running the test this way versus, say serially as part of your CI/CD or in some other step. So we'll see that test run get submitted here in a minute. Now, in terms of configuration, some different ways that you can configure this. I mentioned that we have an open CLI. So I'm going to go ahead and just open up a command line here and show you that. So if you do pip install testery, if you have Python installed, that'll go ahead and install our CLI and get you the latest version. And then if you look at what we're doing today is create test run. So you can see that there are a few different options for creating a test run. And the two I'd like to highlight today is one is wait for results. If you set that to true, then when you create a test run, it'll block Octopus Deploy or whatever else is triggering your test runs until the test run is complete. And then there's also a switch called fail on failure. And if you set that to true, then it will cause the process itself to report an error code if there are any test failures. Now, depending on how your team operates, you may or may not want to set those differently. So some teams want to have 100% green tests before the deployment process continues. Other teams may expect that 5 or 10% of the tests are going to fail in a test run, and they want to individually review those as part of their process. So maybe what they do is they kick off a full regression run, and then they use a manual intervention step in Octopus Deploy to make sure that somebody is reviewing the failed tests before proceeding with the release. So it's really up to your organization and how you like to do deploys and what your criteria is for a successful build and deployment cycle. So we can see over here, looks like I'm getting more failed tests than I normally expect. So I think I probably wired up something incorrectly here. You can see, oh, you know what I forgot to do is set my execution timeouts. So one thing you can do on the project is you can set what you want in terms of timeouts for individual tests and the entire test run. I just had those numbers set a little too low. So we can go ahead and what we can do here is we can go ahead and restart the test run. One thing that's nice is you can individually restart tests. If you have, say, that situation where 95% of the tests are green and you're in here troubleshooting other tests, you can go ahead and restart those individually. Okay, so that successfully kicked off the test run for our dev environment. Now, if we want to go ahead and run the same set of tests in the QA environment, we can go ahead and kick off a QA deployment here. So just to show you what that's like, since there's a lifecycle set up, we're just going ahead and promoting the build. And so now it's kicking off the QA test run. And that's really all you need to do to get post-deployment tests set up as part of your pipeline. Now, there's another option I'd like to show you here. Aside from configuring the test runs directly in Octopus Deploy, another option is to have Octopus Deploy notify Testery of a test result or of a deployment, and then take advantage of a feature in Testery called Schedules, which lets you configure which tests you want to configure based on that. So to set this one up, I'm going to go ahead and add a step to my process. I'm going to search for Testery again, and then this time I'm going to call report deployment. And then this time I'm just going to call it report deployment. I'm going to again say run once on worker, and I'm going to hop over here and just grab this token again, paste the token in here. If you're doing this for a real project, it's highly recommended that you use project variables for anything that gets passed into your process steps like this. That way, if they change, you don't have to go through and re-update the process everywhere. But since we're just doing this, for an example today, I'm not doing it that way. We're going to go ahead and add the same version of the test that we used before. We're going to again say example dash WebDriver IO. For the environment, we're going to again say Octopus environment name. For the build ID, we're going to again use Octopus release number. And then we just save that step. And that's all we need to do to notify Testery when there's a deployment. So if I turn off the other version of this, and then I create a new release, need to save my changes first. Now when this starts running, this is going to start notifying Testery when there's a deployment. So what we can do here when we're using this approach is we can leverage the fact that Testery is an environment-aware testing platform. And we can go ahead and set up schedules to run in our different environments. So, schedules are nice. Aside from running on an individual deploy, you can also run on an interval. So say you just want to run the latest version of the development tests and you want to run them, every night so that you've got a full regression test ready to go in the morning when you show up. One option to set that up is to just use this schedule functionality. And it'll run the same set of tests that are running as part of your deployment pipeline. Or you can specify different filters. So if you want your deployment pipeline to just run smoke tests, but you want to still run full regression every day, you can come here and you can just add full regression tests. You can also specify individual tests using the test filters. So that's a pretty nice way of running tests on a regular schedule. So today what we want to do, though, is we want to set it up so that when there is a deployment to the dev or QA environment, we're triggering a test run using this method. So what we can do is we can say, when we go to the development environment, when there's a deployment, I want to run my smoke tests for dev and just pick the latest deployed version. And then here you would normally select whatever tags you have. So if you have smoke tests as a tag, you can select that tag. And then I can go ahead and add another schedule and say that, when we go to QA and we have a deployment, now I want to run my full regression. which might take longer. So I don't want to run it on every commit to dev, but I do want to run it before I do a release. And then here I'm just going to leave the tags unset so that it runs that full set of tests. So now that I've got this new deployment process, if I deploy to QA and kick off deploy, now instead of running create test run, it's going to report deployment. And then that's going to trigger the appropriate schedule based on the environment that gets deployed to. You know, another reason that this is a cool way to configure your tests is you may have a certain set of tests that you always want to run as part of your deployment. But this particular release, you want to change that set of tests. So you might come in here and you edit the tags or filters that are involved. Or you want to run additional tests. So maybe what's in your pipeline is pretty good, but you have additional tests that you want to run beyond that aren't part of your normal process. You could put in a manual check on the Octopus deploy side, and then you could come in here and just, you know, trigger whichever schedules you want to run that are pre-configured to run the right set of tests. So a really cool set of functionality for folks. So here you can see, you know, it submitted our test run for the full regression, and now that's going to run against the QA environment. Something else I'd like to show you while we're in here is I mentioned that you want to get your test results in the right place at the right time. So say we have a QA team that's hanging out in Slack, and we want to make sure that when Octopus deploy triggers a QA deployment, and then Testery runs the test runs, that your team in Slack gets a notification if there are any failing tests. So what I can do is I can come to my integrations tab here, and I can go ahead and authorize my Slack integration. And I've already created a channel called Octopus Test Runs. So we're going to configure this to post messages to that channel. And that's really all we need to do to get that set up to post messages. So that integration is good to go now. And it looks like we did it just in time. Oh, sorry, we do need to set up an alert. So we're going to say when a test run fails, then I want to send a Slack message to Octopus test runs. Let's see if I got that in time for the test run we were just watching. Maybe I did. And so I'm going to pull up Slack for this channel. Oh, it looks like I didn't quite get it in time. So what we'll do is we'll go ahead and we can rerun this. It only took a minute. You can see some of the previous runs from when we were testing this out. So it's nice that you can see the test run status, which project it was for, which environment where the tests ran. And you also get a link to the specific GitHub project with the tests in it, or Bitbucket project if you're using Bitbucket. And then you could click review results in order to get to the specific test results. So here, if I'm looking at the project we've got set up, the sample project, one of the things that's nice about this integration as well is because we're integrated with GitHub as well as Bitbucket, you see your status updates with the test results on your specific pull requests. In both Bitbucket and GitHub, you can set it up so that you can't merge a pull request until you've been shown that the tests are passing. And so that's a really nice feature for compliance reasons or for just ensuring better quality to make sure that your post-deployment verification checks are also included in the criteria for whether or not a branch can be merged to master. It can be really helpful. And you can also link to the previous results here, so we can see that, you know, the last test run we had for this particular branch failed. And if you click through, then you're taken to the test results for that particular test run. So looks like we're still running here. It's just taking a minute for the individual test results to come through. The sample project is set up for 5 test runners. As I mentioned, you know, we can go to dozens or even hundreds, depending on what you're trying to do. You can see the status of things as they're running and such. And so we should be getting a test failure here in just a second. And I just had the alert come through. So this has notified the team that, hey, we had a failing test run that somebody needs to take a look at. And then if they click through to that, they're taken directly to the test results for this individual test run that we just saw. So there you have it. That's pretty much the 2 different ways you have to integrate your post-deployment verification checks using Testery through Octopus Deploy. The first method with creating test run, you're configuring inside of the Octopus Deploy step what set of tests that you want to run, which environments you want to run them in. And in the second option, you're just adding one step that's just always going to happen for your Octopus Deploy. And then Testery can be configured depending on what your particular criteria is. Now, why might you use one option over the other? Well, if you want the control of what test runs should take place to happen on the Octopus Deploy side, you can use the create test run integration. And then if someone wants to change what set of tests are run, they need to change it as part of the deployment process. But we found in some cases, folks have other teams that are responsible for determining the set of tests than the teams that are responsible for configuring the deployment process. So in those cases, you can add that one report deployment step, and then whatever team is responsible for configuring the tests can come in and just set up different schedules so that there's an appropriate set of tests for every deployment. And that's really everything you need to do. So if you have any questions about that, my team and I hang out in the Octopus Deploy channels. So if you want to join that community and have any questions after the webinar, we'd be happy to answer those. And then we're also here to answer any questions you may have today.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that, Chris. That was awesome. Got a few questions for you, actually. So David is asking, does Testery work with GitLab?
So we currently only support GitHub and Bitbucket, but GitLab support is definitely on the roadmap and shouldn't be too bad to add when we need to.
Cool. Do you have an idea when you would add that feature? Is it like next year?
I don't have a specific date.
Cool.
Yeah.
I've got a question from Zach. Zach is asking, what other reporting avenues are supported other than Slack, if any?
Yeah, so in terms of alerts, you could send alerts. We actually support webhooks, which is kind of cool. If you're familiar with, there's a tool called Zapier, which can catch webhooks and then do pretty much anything with them. So we've had some folks wire up Testery to trigger a Zapier webhook, which can then go to, you name it, I mean, create a Jira ticket, Trello card, anything you want pretty much. We can also send emails. We've added an integration with OpsGenie. So some folks are using Testery to run a subset of their tests in their production environments. So, you know, say they run, 300 or so tests in their dev environment, and then they run their full regression of, say, 3,000 tests against their QA environment, but then they have a couple dozen tests that they want to run against production that are mission critical tests. They can run those in the Testery platform. And then if those tests fail, there's an OpsGenie alert that goes out that sends people a page notification and wakes them up in the middle of the night. So, we try to be as flexible as possible about giving people as many options as they need in order to get notifications when there are test results available.
Awesome. Thank you very much for that. I've got a couple questions about Teams. I don't think you mentioned Teams there, but obviously with Zapier, you would probably be able to do something there. But is there any sort of integration for alerting teams that work with Teams, and also not just people, but can you put it into team channels?
So this would be Microsoft Teams.
Yes, that would be Microsoft Teams. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you could possibly do that through a Zapier integration.
Yeah, probably does. Zapier does everything, so that's always good. Okay.
I would have to check on that. We
Yeah,
currently don't request to add it.
that's fine. That's fine. Next question is: are you able to pass Octopus variables to your test runs in Testery?
Yes, and that's actually a really cool thing to be able to do. So let me see what happened to my command line. Might have closed that. We have another setting here called variable. If you pass in a variable here when you're creating a test run, it's just a series of key value pairs that can be passed in, and those variables then get passed into the actual test run. And so we're able to pass from Octopus Deploy into those variables when creating the test run. Now, why can that be useful? That could be useful for things like if you have the URL for a tenant, like if each tenant represents a different site and that site URL changes and they're dynamically built, you can actually dynamically create an environment in Testery, or you can use an existing environment and update the URL to that new tenant URL name. And that's really useful for being able to run the tests based on the environment that was just provisioned by Octopus Deploy. So it's definitely cool to be able to pass those variables back and forth.
Yeah, you could add in a couple of other things as well, like make it so that put in things like project name, space name, so it's easy for people to then go back to the same Octopus instance and find the project that's running into issues as well, I imagine.
Yep. Yeah, and if
Eh,
there's interest, we could potentially even provide the capability to customize the message that's going to Slack to also include a link to the Octopus Deploy deployment. I could see something like that being useful for folks. So if that's something you'd be interested in seeing, let me know.
Awesome, thank you very much for that. Jelani is asking, is it possible to integrate Testery and SonarQube?
So we've done some things there. I would say it's not easy, but it is possible right now. So we're adding the option of having different reporting output formats. So when you, there's also a report test run step. Report test run. And this has a few parameters such as, what's your output type and file. It does show SonarQube here right now. I would say, let's just say that's experimental right now, but it is something we've started implementing.
Excellent, excellent. Well,
Yep.
we'll give it another moment for any other questions to come in. I think we're almost done now. Give it 30 seconds. Yeah, I think it's safe to say all the questions have been answered. So firstly, I would just like to say thank you very much. Oh, no, I've got, what are the more, from Zach, what are the more complex integrations you have seen with Testery?
Yeah, so complex integrations in terms of deployment process and how many tests are running and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, well, actually,
Yeah.
why don't you share a little bit? The one that got me actually interested was the 750,000 tests.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us a little bit about that, and is there any kind of complex integrations there?
Yeah. So, I have to be, it's an enterprise client, so I have to be a little vague in my response here.
Yep.
But, when you have a deployment process where you've got, multiple teams who are working on multiple versions of the code at any point in time, they're writing tests as they go, they're running tests as they go. They want to deploy the full stack to multiple environments while they're developing these individual features, and they want to make sure that they're working properly. So in those cases, you might have 15 or 20 different environments that are constantly being deployed to with a different version of the code. And then when you need to go to your development environment, those different feature branches are getting merged. When you cut a release, that development environment is going to QA and you're running a larger set of tests. And then when the QA environment gets promoted to production, you get a different set of tests there to make sure that your smoke tests are working. So along the way, you've also got different components that are being developed. So if you're deploying your website and you're deploying your API, you're doing database update scripts, and you want full stack testing running against all of those, it's nice to be able to have Testery as a consistent way of running your tests across all of your deployments and all of your environments, regardless of whether or not you're deploying, a C# based API with NUnit spec flow tests that run on top of it, or a React application that has a website that goes out to S3, or Azure websites. All of these different technologies may have tests that are written in different languages even, but you still want to have a consistent process for compliance purposes to make sure that the right tests are run at the right time and that everything is being tested before it makes its way into master and then gets deployed to your customers. So in terms of complex deployments, we've seen different frameworks involved in terms of testing frameworks, different languages involved in terms of what's getting deployed from the application perspective, UI, API, database, big data, you name it. And then we've also seen different deployment processes. So, some folks using Git flow, some folks using trunk-based development, feature branching, no feature branching. And we've been able to be really flexible, and we don't prescribe that you do any of those practices. We certainly help guide folks if they need assistance with how to set those things up. But we really make our system flexible so that you can run the right tests at the right time in your process based on what you need to be able to do.
Awesome. Very comprehensive answer.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much, Chris. Okay, so we've got one other question. They're coming in now. How many tests can Testery run in parallel? We can run 8 threads in parallel in our internal test infrastructure. How many more could I run on Testery?
Yeah, so Testery is only constrained by two things. One is your system under test's ability to handle concurrency. So, we've done cases where we've gone up to hundreds of concurrent, and we've increased that number until we get to the point where the system under test can't handle it anymore. And then the other constraint, honestly, is just budget. Now, we think we're an affordable way to run additional tests, certainly compared to trying to do it yourself. But ultimately, we can scale up as high as we need to. We're a cloud native platform, and we've built things from the ground up with the intention of being able to scale as much as needed.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Chris. One last question. This will be the last question of the day. And this is a good one. Not saying that they've all been good questions, but what does the onboarding process look like when I first get started with Testery and Octopus? Great question. Obviously, with the onboarding side from Octopus, there's lots of great resources there. Chris is massively experienced in both Octopus and Testery, so I will hand it over his week. Oh, no, there we go. No, I keep sending the, there we go. Sorry, it's back to front. So what does the onboarding process look like?
Yeah, so, I'll be honest, we're still fairly new as a company, and, every day we're trying to improve on that process and figure out how to better do things. So what I would say for now is, what we've shown you today in terms of the application is something you should be able to do today as well. So if you go to our pricing tab on the testery.io website, you sign up for the free plan. If you get stuck anywhere along the way, there's a little icon in the bottom right-hand corner where you can ask questions or reach out to us. So definitely take advantage of that. And then also happy to share emails for support with anybody who's interested in having some additional assistance with the onboarding process. And then we also have a support community through Slack that you can join as well, which I can give the invite to. So I think everyone here has my contact info or the ability to get it. If not, just ask in the Octopus Deploy and I'll share the appropriate info there. But yeah, what I can say is what you saw today, you should be able to do. And if you have existing tests that you'd like run in the platform, that should work for you. But if you get stuck anywhere, don't hesitate to reach out to us and we'll be happy to get you more information.
Awesome. And these steps are available in the Octopus community contributed step template library. So if you go to library.octopus.com, you can get started with that really quickly. Okay, so that unfortunately is the end of today's webinar. Chris, I absolutely loved it. I learned a bunch. I'm going to be doing all of the post-deployment verification testing with Testery and Octopus. So thank you very much for that. Everyone, thank you very much for joining. Just at the end of today's webinar, there is a short feedback form that we would love you to fill out. It provides myself and Chris information on how this webinar went, and it will help us effectively pick further webinars and improve as we go. Just one last thing. A recording will be emailed in the next 24 to 48 hours, along with the resources today. We do have more webinars every 2 weeks. Octopus, we're doing our webinars. On October 14th, we have our release 2020.4. That's with Adam Close, Ryan Russo, and there's a whole bunch of stuff on our newest version of Octopus. And it's going to be all about structured variables, YAML, XML, everything, all of the variables. And then October 30th, I'm back with Bob Walker, the VP of the Octopus Advisory Team, and we're going to be talking about runbooks and how it enables DevOps and self-service. You can catch Octopus Deploy on Twitter at Octopus Deploy and Testery at Testery_IO. Chris, thank you very much. And everyone else, thank you very much for attending, and we'll see you again in 2 weeks. All the best.
Thank you.